By way of introduction, Marc Lamont Hill is the host of BET News and Black News Tonight, with Steve Charles Chair in Media, Cities, and Solutions at Temple University. He's the founder and director of the People's Education Center and the owner of Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books in Philadelphia. He has authored or co-authored several books, including Nobody and We Still Here. He joins us via Zoom this evening. Todd Brewster is a veteran journalist and historian who has worked as an editor for Time and Life and as a senior producer for ABC News. He's the co-author of the #1 New York Times bestselling book, The Century, and the author of the acclaimed Lincoln's Gamble. He's taught journalism at Temple University and now Holyoke College. Their new book, Seen and Unseen, reveals the connections between our current news headlines and social media feeds and the country's long struggle against racism. Seen and Unseen demonstrates that changes start with the raw evidence of those recording history on the front lines. Now we're excited to hear from Marc Hill and Todd Brewster.
Thank you. Like we didn't mention that Marc is actually in Philadelphia, so he comes to us by virtue of our tech crazy atmosphere we live in, which is of course appropriate given what the theme of the night is, the role of technology, social media, the cell phone camera in America's reckoning with race that's happened over the past few years. It's actually a great thing to have a co-author in multiple ways, particularly a co-author like Marc Lamont Hill. But one of the ways in which it's great is that you travel with your own moderator. We ask each other questions when we are here. So I'm going to be interviewing Marc, and Marc's going to be interviewing me. And I'm going to start by asking Marc, what the hell is this book about?
That's a great question. And good evening, everybody. And I wish I could be there with you all tonight. Normally I would be, but having a newborn has made travel a little more challenging for the last few months. But fortunately, we have technology to have this conversation in the way that we are, which is something that could not have happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And so the moment that we're in is in many ways what not only affords this conversation, but the very book that we're having the conversation about. This book for me, in addition to an opportunity to just write and think with Todd, who I regard as just one of the finest writers I know and one of the great thinkers that I know, is an opportunity to reflect on this moment. We were we've been in conversation for 8 years now, and thinking about ideas, talking. We have friends in common, and share an agent. And other things. And so we've had opportunities to share and to think together. And then George Floyd was killed. And we all know the story. And if we don't know the story, we know the image. And as Todd often says, if we didn't see the image or watch the video, we know that the image in the video exists. It's impossible to live in the United States and maybe even the West and not be familiar with the killing of George Floyd. And for me, one of the questions that emerged was, why this moment? And we begin the book with that question of why. Why this moment? What is it about this moment that prompted international outrage and action, that prompted laws to be created, that got companies to change their policy, that got policing to be reimagined? What is it about this moment that was different? Because in 2016, or in 2014, excuse me, when Mike Brown was killed, I was certain that was the moment. And when Trayvon Martin was killed a few years prior, I was certain that was the moment. 30 years ago, we just knew Rodney King was the moment. And sometimes we're right. I mean, Rodney King was a moment, and Mike Brown absolutely was a moment. But there's something different about this. And part of what this book is trying to unpack is the why. And I think where we begin is the fact that it was that video. That video allowed America to bear witness. In the middle of a pandemic, we're all home, we're all stuck in our houses to varying degrees. We all have our devices in our hands. That's right. We all were forced to watch this video. And this video had a certain kind of power. It had a filmic power because it was film. We had to watch it for minute after minute after minute of him being executed. but it also had the kind of force of a still image. And we watched it, and it hit our hearts, and it hit our spirits, and it prompted action and activism and response. And what we do with this book is get beyond the kind of journalistic questions of the who, what, when, where, and why of George Floyd, although we go there. And we ask the question, what is it about this technology? What is it about this medium, these platforms that allowed for the type of response we got? But, you know, Todd's a historian, and he forces me to think about things across time and to think about change across time. And, you know, because I was very much fascinated by this moment, but what Todd forces me to often do, which is why it's great to write with people, what Todd often forces me to do is say, okay, but how is this moment connected to all these other previous moments? This isn't the first time that people have used technology and tools and platforms and media to tell the truth about America, or to tell a version of the truth about America, or to fight for racial justice. What does it mean that across time, media and technology has always been in play? And how does that help us think about the future? And so we look across cases in the present moment, but we also look to history to help us understand the key role that media and technology plays in this. And I guess for me, Todd, the question I would ask you is a similar one, which is, what is it about this moment you think that led to the kind of response and kind of outcome we see? Because again, we don't just look at I keep saying Mike Brown, George Floyd. We look at these other cases, and what is it about this moment that prompted the kind of responses and the type of possibilities that we see?
Well, I would start by saying, you said it very eloquently, Mark, that you know, we thought that Trayvon Martin was the moment. We thought that Eric Garner was the moment. We thought that Rodney King was the moment. Well, those who have even longer historical scopes will say, we thought Emmett Till was the moment, or we thought Jonesboro was the moment, or we thought the uncovering of the horror of the lynchings of the late 19th century by the great Black journalist. I'm forgetting your name.
Ida B. Wells Barnett. Yeah,
that's right. Wells, Ida B. Wells. That for them, it was the thought that this had to be the turning point. And yes, there were things that happened because Mamie Till swore that the casket had to be opened so they could see what happened to my baby, right? Which is what she said. And that photograph was incredibly powerful. And it's very powerful almost in its own time as much as George Floyd's was in this time. But one of the things that happened with George Floyd is that again spoke to us through our own technology and our own moment. This was something that, and it's ironic because I think we lost your picture now, Mark, for a second, but it's ironic because, as you mentioned, the image sticks with us. And you know, the image of of Walter Scott, for instance, was shot in the back in South Carolina, North Charleston, South Carolina, by a police officer who then covered it up and made it look like he was fighting with him over his taser. Complete lie, captured by a bystander on cell phone video. Eric Garner captured by a cell phone video. But there was something about George Floyd's death that had symbolic importance, that resonated with the DNA of our country. And I certainly believe this, that we carry with us a kind of historical memory that lives in ourselves. And that the notion of George Floyd being killed, it's the only one you can picture in your mind. It's like a piece of sculpture. The man lying prone on the pavement, his foot next to the tire of a police cruiser, already a position of vulnerability. A black man with a white man, a law enforcer, with his knee in the neck of that black man, looking nonchalantly off into the. It is a sculptural account of the story of race in America. James Baldwin was asked in the 1960s, early 1970s, what is it that the Negro wants? This is a common phrase tossed out in the public conversation back in the 60s and 70s. Dick Cavett show, for those of you who remember it. What is it the Negro wants? And what James Baldwin said was, we want the white man to take his knee off our neck. Wow. And in 1963, shortly after the bombing of the Birmingham church that killed 4 young girls, and the sense of turmoil there was in the country then about the growing race wars, right? Bobby Kennedy invited several Black leaders to his apartment in New York City to ask them what it is that the Negro wants. And Lorraine Hansford, right, the great playwright, as she was leaving that event, shook Bobby Kennedy's hand, disappointed that he was not going to do more. And she said to him, I want to know why I'm living in a country where tolerates that photograph of a police officer in Birmingham, Alabama, in the riots that came into the streets after the killing of those 4 girls, with his knee in the neck of a Black woman lying on the pavement. Now consider that. Those 2 images, most of us probably couldn't have recalled those images in any way, but they did have some kind of resonant role in the symbolic conversation that we have about race. So when George Floyd is killed, really crucified, because it's a long, painful, slow death, calls out for his mother like Christ calls out for his father, right? I mean, there's symbolism, and there's Christian symbolism. I say this knowing my dear friend Father Ken Smith, who's baptized my children, is here. There's Christian symbolism in this death, right? There's sculptural quality to this death. There's American mythology wrapped up in this death. And so I think, Mark, that's why, I mean, you mentioned before that it's a video image that operates like a still. It operates on multiple technological languages. The symbolic nature of this frozen moment that a photograph allows, still photograph, and the narrative quality of a video. We react to it as a still. That's the image we have in our mind. At the same time, that what makes that still so powerful is we went on for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Mark, I'm going to ask you a question. Are you still there?
Yep.
Okay, we've lost your video image. I don't know. So the second chapter of our book begins with a story that I imagine most people in this room do not know. And it's the story of Janiqua Charles. And I wonder if you could explain that a little. We sometimes, when we speak, we show this video that Mark is going to describe, but even a description, I think you can get a sense of the power of it as he walks Malcolm around. I have to tell you, Malcolm was born a couple months early, right, Mark? How many weeks early?
Malcolm was born 9.5 weeks early. And so he's just getting home, and he's decided to be a little, he's refocusing me, that's all. But so I have to stand, but
Mark and I had a conversation the other day where I said, he was telling me how demanding that Malcolm can be. And I said, well, you know what, when you get older and you're sitting on that veranda, you can make him bring that drink to you every morning, right?
Yes, he will be reminded of all of these stories. But it's a really powerful story, you know, and again, all of us saw it, or many of us saw it on social media and didn't even know what we were seeing. With Janiqua Charles, there was a woman, she was headed into a gentleman's club, back into a gentleman's club. She'd forgotten her purse, she said, and she wanted to go back in. And the security guard said that she couldn't go back in. And before you know it, he's detaining her. And she's upset. She's clearly intoxicated in some form or fashion. And she says, she says, you're not gonna let me go. And they have a back and forth. And then she turns the exchange into a viral meme, not even knowing it. All of a sudden, she just starts going, you were about to lose your job. You were about to lose your job. You were about to lose your job because you all detained me for nothing. And so everybody starts to, I'm so sorry. everybody starts to clip the "you about to lose your job" part. It gets remixed. It becomes part of like internet meme history. It becomes part of everything that we're doing in this moment. And I am struggling here. I really apologize, everybody.
Let me take over for this. So Janiqua Charles, it's interesting. Almost.
Oh, there it is. This is
right.
Yeah. The great savior of all parents.
Yeah.
I was trying to find it. I was trying to casually find it. So Janiqua Charles is having this this moment, and the moment is telling for so many reasons. First of all, the fact that she said "you about to lose your job" speaks to the power of everyday citizens to sort of retain or to wrest back some sense of power and agency, right? Before, a woman named Janiqua Charles in the South getting stopped by anybody was vulnerable. She could be Sandra Bland, she could be anybody, right? But now she had some agency, she had some power, she had some space to resist, because she had confidence that if the video camera was rolling, that somebody could be held accountable, that he could lose his job. Now, he was a security guard, and he actually thought it was funny. He put it on his own Facebook page. It turned out not to be a huge deal to him, but the point was the fact that there was even the fact that there was even a possibility here of resistance. So that's part of it, right? And it became the soundtrack to so much other stuff, which is part of the age of the meme, the clip, the video, the sound bite. It becomes one thing, but like the post-structuralist theorists talk about the death of the author, you know, what you intended for as the author is not necessarily how it gets taken up. And so suddenly people are running against Donald Trump. People are trying to vote Donald Trump out of office. And when Donald Trump takes that walk of shame out of DC, do you know what music is playing in the background on Twitter? At least Black Twitter. "You about to lose your job." And so so there were so many things that were happening. It's very similar to Kendrick Lamar's "All Right" that we were singing in the streets of Ferguson during Ferguson summer, right? He didn't mean the song for that particular resistance, but it took up other means. So all of this is happening. And so for me, her story is so incredibly interesting because it speaks to the way that these technologies afford people a sense of possibility. Now, the sad irony is, while all this is happening, she doesn't know. She is struggling with substance abuse. She's separated from her family. She doesn't even have internet access. She doesn't even know that she's a social media spectacle. So that also speaks to the gaps in access and resources and power that people have. It's not that the internet's not created equal. It never has been. And so we have to think about that as we talk about these tools and technologies, because if we don't keep track of power dynamics, particularly around class and race, we can lose sight of the fact that everybody doesn't have access to the same ability to tell their own story or to tell their own truth. The Kyle Rittenhouse can narrate an entire story in a way that not only may help him stay out of prison, which it did, but also have an army of backers. Janiqua Charles doesn't have that same possibility, doesn't have that same luxury. So I think it's a very powerful and interesting story that I think in many, and for me, when we were talking about this book, George Floyd was the first thing we talked about. And for me, the first thing that came to my mind was this woman and you about to lose your job, because it also speaks to a bigger campaign and the role that the campaign can play and the influencer can play, both of these ideas in this struggle for racial justice. We can now march for things without hitting the physical streets. We can now call for firings. I mean, this didn't make the book, but Amy Cooper was the white woman in Central Park who called the police on Christian Cooper, the Black Harvard graduate who was bird watching in Central Park on Memorial Day. I mean, I can't imagine a less threatening human being than a Central Park bird watcher Memorial Day with a Harvard alumni T-shirt, right? I mean, like, and yet because of the mythologies of white supremacy and racism, even that Black guy is threatening, right? So she ended up weaponizing her own anxieties and fears and the police against him by basically lying and saying he was attacking her. The moment we found out what happened, people took to the internet. They found her job. She literally lost her job. She was not only about to lose her job, she did lose her job. And I'm not saying that's always good or fair, but my point is, again, these tools and technologies give everyday people the ability to spotlight injustice and to act in ways that we simply could not have 50 years ago, or hell, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
I'll mention a couple of things that are in concert with that. One is, first of all, the Uber story of the book, of course, is the George Floyd story. And even that one resonates with some of the same thematic material because Derek Chauvin is about to lose his job, right? I mean, and it's why is he about to lose his job? Because of the randomness of a teenager walking down the street with her, was her sister or her niece, I'm trying to remember, on her way to Cup Foods, which is outside of Cup Foods is where all this happened in Minneapolis. And they're going there to get snacks. And they come upon this. And she has, like everyone else, one of these in her pocket. And she pulls out her phone, has the courage to do it, but did not have the courage of authorship in the sense that this was not planned. It was not even as planned as much as the Rodney King video was planned, which was done by a man who had ambitions to be a videographer, a video journalist, and he'd just gotten new equipment. And he was trying it out when he's out of his apartment window, his high-rise apartment window, when he looks down and sees what's happening on the streets of Los Angeles. But here is Darnella Frazier, this teenage girl walking. She has the courage to pull out her phone and take the video of that event. It's because of that we have the record of it. The democratization of video, the use of that against Derek Chauvin, who otherwise probably would have gone unprosecuted. The second thing that resonates with this is Mark referred to the fact that the power we have now that has been given to us to marginalized groups. If you go back to the story of race in America, the book does this. We look at the nature of the role of film, still photography, television, cable, and the internet finally, all in the role of American racial history. When The Birth of a Nation comes out in 1950, terrific piece of filmmaking, one of the first grand achievements in the medium by D.W. Griffith, the great director, right? But with a decidedly racist message and a reactionary message, a rewriting of American history to say that the South was the noble party in the Civil War, and to cast the period after the Civil War in Reconstruction as one of the darkest moments of American history. Why? Because we entrusted power to a race that was inherently ignorant, corrupt, over-sexualized, dirty, lazy. All these themes come forward. At the time when it happens, it's recognized by the NAACP and other Black groups as being incredibly destructive of the progress that had been made from the Civil War, and that it really threatened the achievements of the Civil War. And they seek to create another movie, one that might counter the message of Birth of a Nation, but they can't do it. Why? Because they don't have the capital. The capital is not there to fund a competitive movie, The Birth of a Nation. As a result, The Birth of a Nation starts as a little germ of an idea that gets spread and spread and spread to the point where we're still living with it, right? We still live with that resonance of those ideas, the kind of replacement theory that was advanced in its crudest form in The Birth of a Nation is still being advanced today. Messages need counter messages, right? As the great Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, sunshine's the best disinfectant. Reverse the openness. The openness allowed us to reverse the camera back onto to reverse the message of injustice and replace it with one of justice. Mark, the book closes with a chapter called Another Chance. Can you explain to me, after all what we've talked about here, and I know you hit some of the themes that are constructive, but the idea that we look through American history and so much of it is one would not be surprised to come away with a tremendous cynicism about American history, about the inability for us to achieve the kinds of dreams that our most progressive thinkers have advanced for us. Can you tell us what that other chance is, and why you come away, and we both came away in the writing of this book with still a sense of hope?
I think, first of all, I think it's important to note that we entered the book with that sense of hope. I don't think that everyone shares our sense of hope. But I think that it's important to begin from that place of distinguishing our hope from optimism. Optimism, I think, is a more naive sort of expectation that everything's going to work out just fine. To be optimistic is to have a kind of simplistic analysis of good over evil. I think hope keeps track of our obstacles and our challenges. It keeps us honest about the work that needs to be done in order for us to get there. This is not an inevitability. Freedom and democracy is not an inevitability. It's what comes from our blood and our sweat, our struggle, our faith, though, in this possibility of the American democratic experiment. And I think that when we look throughout the book, all of the people, and this wasn't intentional, but when we look at the book in retrospect, all the people who we drill down, whether it's Frederick Douglass or Ida B. Wells, or all of these people had an abiding faith in the possibility of America, but not an optimism. And many of them didn't think that it would happen in their lifetime. Many didn't think it would happen in the next generation, the generation after that. But they had a fundamental belief that other worlds, other futures, and other futures were possible. And that rested on the struggle. And when I think about that last chapter, whether it's the tearing down of Confederate statues, or whether it's the number of people who took to the streets to resist the violence of January 6th, which is outside the scope of the book, but resist the insurrection of January 6th, or the number of people who protested George Floyd, or the things that took place legislatively since these moments of crisis, it's a reminder of what is possible. And I think that vision of what is possible is what we're always holding on to. America is always about defining and redefining. I mean, I think we lean the heaviest. If there's a patron saint of this book, it's James Baldwin. And Baldwin was fiercely critical of America, fiercely critical of it. But he was fiercely critical of America precisely because he believed in its possibilities. And he, more than anyone, was not naive about America's warts, about America's blemishes. But Baldwin understood what was possible, but he also understood what was necessary in order to achieve a new America. We don't want to live in a country that grows old but doesn't grow up. For America to grow up, we have to confront the truth. We have to confront our wounds. We have to confront our challenges. And what media and technology allow for, what the great freedom fighters in this book that we spotlight have created space for, is for America to be honest about itself. When we look at that video for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, it's the end of innocence for anybody who believed that, well, if you just act right, you'll be fine. It's the end of innocence for people who say, oh, that's the olden days. It's the end of innocence, just like Rodney King was the end of innocence for people who say police only hit you if you fight back, right? I mean, these videos force us to come to terms with something. The question is, once you come to terms with it, what do you do? Do you ignore it? Do you leave the statues hanging? Do you let the people march and say that's freedom of speech? Or do you have a critical voice? Do you offer that critical voice in the service of justice and democracy? And I think in our book, you will leave understanding the sweep of history. You will leave understanding how complicated and messy this is, but you also leave with a strong sense of possibility, that victory is not inevitable, but it is indeed possible. And given the tools and technologies of what James Scott calls the weapons of the weak at our disposal, it may be more possible now than ever before. I guess, Todd, my question for you, and I know you want to read a bit, is what keeps you, based on everything we wrote about and we think about in this book, what keeps you with any sense of hope around this stuff? Because it's very easy to say, you know what, this is always going to be this way.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back and strike some of the same themes that you just struck. And I think that what I was about to allude to, and the last chapter is called Another Chance. Every time there's a new technological transformation, it's frightening. It leads to our it rocks our foundations in some way, often for the better, sometimes for the worse, usually a combination of the two, and it's left to our own role as human agents to make a difference. In the 19th century, Mark referred to Frederick Douglass. Few of you here may know that Frederick Douglass was the most photographed man in the country, more than Abraham Lincoln. Now, why? He also wrote 3 autobiographies. Why? Why? Why would you think? Let me ask you. What would be your thoughts about? Yes, in the back.
Do we have different audiences in mind, and or were they written at different points in his life?
Yeah, he may have had different audiences in mind, but I want to focus a little bit more or less on the autobiographies than on the technology part of this. What was it about the photograph that the photograph could do that nothing before it could do?
Well, Frederick Douglass was better looking.
Well, there's that too. In fact, I will go with, yes.
I didn't think explicitly at one point, or right, so he didn't think that a white man could actually like see him or capture him.
Yes, very good, very good. So you think of what the role of painting was in terms of representing human form, right? Much left to the wise elements of the painter, right? So it's an interpretive medium much more than photography. Photography is more of a literal medium, right? And what Douglass felt was he didn't want to leave the portrayal of the black man as he hopes of representative up to a white artist. Just as much, he thought of photography as a kind of transformative medium that would allow black people to be seen as people, as human beings. He's alive at a time when there's a tremendous amount of pseudoscience around him that is ranking races as in terms of their in terms of a hierarchy, with the black race at the bottom, right, closer to animals than to human beings. He wanted to represent himself with dignity, right? If you know anything about Frederick Douglass, you know his role in terms of as an orator, right, and as an abolitionist, and his frustration that he would have when he would come to speak and speak eloquently about about abolition, and be asked in question and answer sessions like we're about to have here, what was it like to be a slave? What was it like to have the chains around you, as if you were an animal of some sort, being held as a curiosity rather than as a human being? So the photography was extremely important to him as an advancement in towards racial acceptance and equality. And you go forward from that, and you see the role of why did Mamie Till want the open casket, right? And you come all the way to the present moment. Why did Darnell Frazier want to record what was happening to George Floyd rather than to be dependent on others to tell the story? So each technological moment has its tremendous advantages for us if we use the technology progressively and productively. So another chance, the title of our last chapter refers to the fact that we are we all know this, we're in this sort of crazy technological moment that's scary as much as it is exciting, right? But the exciting parts of it are that it does give us another chance to reform ourselves around these principles that we have held dear and that we have been frustrated in achieving. So I come away, Mark, with that feeling that, you know, as worried as I am about the future of the country and the future of the world, given all the various things happening from climate change on through, you know, social media to the destruction of our public discourse, all these things. But I believe that it will become a transformative moment. I think that's a possibility of becoming a transformative moment in terms of reordering some of our priorities and reordering our relationships with each other. So with all that, why don't we take some questions from the audience? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
great. Go ahead, you can, just
Okay.
call out.
In the back, yes?
So I want to say, first of all, thank you for such a great talk. The book sounds amazing. In particular, thank you for your message of belief and hope and distinguishing that from optimism. I thought that was great. So my question is sort of going back to the point about Birth of a Nation and how people at the time and perhaps since then we're not able to come up with an effective counter message or counter programming. So it's fine to say that we have the tools, but what is the counter message or counter messages, the counter programming or programming,
Yeah,
that we need to look towards, because I think that this fear-based messaging
Yeah.
that has been predominant is so effective
yeah.
that it can counter these messages of them.
Mhm.
But any thoughts you have on the counter message or the counter program would be greatly appreciated.
I'll take that first, and then I'll hand it off to you, Mark, on this. Did you hear the question?
I heard most of it. The
Okay.
general gist is about how to counter, sort of in the present moment, how to counter the fear-based messaging
Yes.
in the same way
Yeah.
that during Birth of a Nation we couldn't because of the lack of resources and access. Is that right?
Well, there was that, and it was also, I think, in general, I think this is the sweep of your question, is that we're in our present moment, we have it certainly, right? That it's wonderful to have these tools, but the tools themselves don't carry values. They don't have
Unless used properly.
yes, they don't have a moral concept. Technology is amoral, right? I think we agree on that. And I would say a couple of things. One is that there's a lot of concern about bias in the media and bias in the way stories are told today. And I would argue that some amount of, not the word bias, but some amount of values understood curation of the media is important for us in our moment, right? It's not enough to show the raw video of what happened in Kenosha, for instance, and what we did for the book, for instance, we went through the videographers' work, who are, you know, these kind of gonzo journalists who roam the streets at they're like the storm chasers who arrive at places of violence, and they record it with their video cameras, and they post this on YouTube, and you can watch hours and hours and hours and hours of it. Right? We've watched a lot of this, and by itself, you cannot really come to conclusions unless you are led in some way. Now, by leading, I mean only that someone applies an intelligence to what is happening in front of them. Not that you distort, not that you corrupt the image of what's happening, but that you approach it. Think of it this way: you're walking into a scene with someone whom you respect, whose values you share, and they are commenting with you on what they're seeing. That's extremely valuable, right? Without that, with this, the kind of high, and I teach journalism, so the high-mindedness put towards the notion of objectivity, which itself is an impossible thing to achieve. Instead, I would say informed, values-driven subjectivity is important to how reporting is done. Informed only by facts, informed by a certain level of ethics that the journalist must embrace, but nonetheless, it is he or she's moment to lead us into what they saw. That's what their gift to us is, that they saw something and came to terms with it. So, Mark, you want to add anything to that?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, we can't fetishize the tools. We can't ascribe magical power to them. We're not going to get free or more democratic or create justice by having better cameras, more video, live streaming, etc. Because the same streams that I'm using, Kyle Rittenhouse is using, the same, ability to distribute information that we rely upon. That's other people are using it for disinformation and misinformation. And so the key, I think, is to one, again, understand these tools are just that, they're tools, and they can be used in all kinds of ways. But I think we have to be intentional about fundraising, intentional about media literacy and critical media literacy, teaching people how to read this stuff, teaching people how to understand it, and teaching people how to produce it. Because if we don't do that, then the person, I remember even 20 or 30 years ago, there are many people who didn't understand for a long time that Fox News at 8 o'clock was not a news report. The guy behind the desk at that time, Bill O'Reilly, and then after that, Sean Hannity at 9 o'clock, whatever. These people were commentators, but they had all of the symbols of traditional journalism. They were sitting behind a desk. It was a white guy with a tie. That's what news anchors look like, right? They read from a prompter. They did all the news anchory stuff, except they weren't anchoring news. And the news is never truly objective, but they weren't even pretending to be, right? They weren't calling balls and strikes here, but it looked like it. There was a time when a blog looked exactly like a website, right? It's a traditional website. And so, people, Todd teaches, I teach, we had students who would be going to blogs as sources, or God forbid, even now, some use Wikipedia as a source because they didn't have the media literacy to understand the distinction between this kind of source and that kind of source. But what does that mean when someone is giving information about the COVID-19 vaccine? What does that mean when someone is talking about what happened on January 6th? What does that mean when it comes to people spreading QAnon conspiracies? Or, all of these things happen because there are people who are committed to distributing bad information, and we have a citizenry that isn't fully equipped to recognize it. But the other thing here is that, again, while the democratization of media, much has been made of it, we also have to constantly talk about, which is why I brought up responded to the Janiqua Charles question in that way. We also have to keep track of the fact that people don't have equal access to it. And so in the same way that Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois, who certainly had a critique of Birth of a Nation, could not make a counter film because they didn't have Griffith's money. Today, I don't have the money, Todd may. I don't have the money to counter the billionaire wealth. So we have to organize for that. We have to fund for that, and we have to be honest about that stuff. Otherwise, we'll always be fighting an uphill battle. But I think that's the key, is teaching people to recognize that it's even a thing that needs to be recognized.
I talk about every technological moment having its moment in the sun, essentially, and yet there's a period of time, you can chart this, where it is bewildering. You don't understand what message, you don't understand the vocabulary. It's like being in a foreign country and not speaking the language. And then there's a time when we get adjusted. We all remember, for instance, television screens, they didn't have running ticker tapes and 5 different fonts smacked across them, and it was just a single image or a slow narrative unfolding in front of us. That doesn't happen anymore. We're getting adjusted to the language and vocabulary, the syntax of the technology that we're living with. That gives us some power over it finally. And it allows us to understand the message as projected through the medium that is of our moment. Another question. Yes, up front here.
Is it okay if I pop up? So
Absolutely, yes.
So Mark,
Yes.
I hope they can hear. Okay.
Right there.
You
Are you there?
You can take over if you
Oh,
want.
no, I don't want to do that. But
Yeah,
I
you can
want to
see
be
it.
able to hear. Can you see me, Mark?
Mark, do you see?
Right on.
Yep, I can see and hear you. Yep.
Okay, what an honor to, hear you guys talk. And how surreal to be talking to you. My husband and I, many years looking at the screen, and thinking, my God, this guy is amazing. So, and kudos, by the way, on how you're handling your baby, because whatever you're doing, it's working. Any of us, all of us in this room are, I think, impressed with that. So when George Floyd was killed, he went back to Houston, his casket or his body came back to Houston. And I grew up there. I'll say I'm from New England. I'm not a Texan, but I did grow up there. There are a lot of good people there, but very much a world of, white, wealthy, conservative oil and gas. And it's just, that's the hotbed for that. And I was talking to my sister the day that George Floyd's body was coming back to Houston. And curiously enough, she was like, oh, the message was, this is kind of a pain in the ass. Like, I can't be bothered with the traffic, with all the crowds, this and that and the other. And I said to her, but hey, this is like the Emmett Till moment. This is important. And, there was no reverence. And it wasn't just my sister, there was a lot of that. Zero, not just lack of reverence, but kind of like a piss off, And what concerns me about that is it just seems like over and over again, no matter what it is, how now we've got that proof, right, with media. It's proof and it's truth. And still, it seems that a certain class of people who we know have a huge amount of political sway and power, always have in this country. I mean, again, basically white, wealthy, conservatives, put up this like force shield of denial. And so, and I'm an artist and writer myself, and it's like, and my hope has always been, you know, that art is one of those things that can finally crack, right? Finally crack the wall and enable people to see through. So anyway, I stand in hope with you, but any thoughts about what the hell it will take to finally crack enough of the wall so that truth will be seen, and that those people will not be in such a comfortable place to just keep saying, oh yeah, whatever, you know,
Yeah,
don't jam up my highways, you know, when George Floyd rolls into town. I mean, what the hell? So anyway.
I think you're asking the right question.
Yeah.
I think part
The
of
question to reframe it is, what the hell?
right, that covers it. Yes, I think for me, a big part of it is why I made the distinction between hope and optimism. If I were an optimistic person, I'd say, you know, we'll keep fighting, and one day those people who don't care will care. I don't believe that. But I also don't believe that that's necessary. If we took if public accommodations in 64 or Voting Rights Act in 65 were put to a public vote, if we'd gone into election booths, polling places, and pulled the lever for those things, we would have lost. There's a way that we don't need the majority to win. The powerful, the language, to frame it as denial, I think, is to, in some ways, let people off the hook, right? It's not always that they don't know, or that they refuse to see it. Sometimes they just don't care.
Mhm.
We live in a world where Black life simply isn't worth as much, where women's bodies and women's reproductive freedom simply isn't worth as much, where the lives of immigrants and trans folk and other able folk just isn't seen as valuable in many circles and spaces. And so I think that the key, what these technologies allow us to do is not to get the powerful to say, oh my God, I didn't know all this time these people were really oppressed, let's do something about it, but to no longer allow them to feign it. When Dr. King stages the action on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, he was taking the technology of the day, the camera, the TV camera, the social media of the day, evening news, right? When Mamie Till is trying to expose the world to the brutal lynching of her son, Emmett Till, she's taking the technology of the day, the camera, the social media of the day, the news, but also Ebony and Jet magazine, which for Black people was the social media of the day. And she was leveraging it so that the world could no longer say that they didn't know. And those who cared, as the song says, we who believe in freedom shall not rest, right? Everybody doesn't believe in freedom. Everybody doesn't believe in justice, but it will marshal enough people that the powerful will be forced to bend, not because they care, not because they have some religious experience, they don't fall off an ass or anything like that. They do it because everyday people force them to. We demand it from them. There are many people who see us acknowledging George Floyd at all as not only a distraction or a disruption, but as a moral atrocity. We talk about this in the book. Candace Owens is saying he's nobody to celebrate. He's no hero. We don't think he's a hero, but we think he's a martyr. That matters. There are people who, after watching Black people get beat on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, still didn't give a damn. But now they no longer can pretend that they didn't know. What this technology does, what these tools do to me, is they end the age of innocence. Not true innocence, but even the feigning of innocence. And it forces people to be accountable. I need you to say you don't give a damn. See, now your people's got to say, you know what? This George Floyd thing, I care about traffic more, right? People are forced to be honest about that. And then it allows us to organize in those ways. And I think that that's key. So I'm not looking for majority rule on justice. I'm not looking for an overall consensus. This isn't going to be a Quaker meeting where we're going to hash this thing out until everybody walks out feeling the same way. But we can get a critical mass of people who can put a spotlight on injustice and get an even smaller number of people to actually do something about it. I think then we win. And I think that's all we need. So it's about managing our expectations as well and being honest about what's possible.
Yeah, I like that distinction in the wording, the use of the word. Of course, you know, denial is to say that you believe from how you know something else. But I would describe what you said as refusal.
Oh, yeah.
Refusal means I see the same thing you see, but I refuse to be myself, to be changed by what I see. And
Yes.
that, it's writing makes you precise. We talked about this actually today, didn't we? About another thing. Writing makes you precise. And the difference between those two words, which, commonly would not be understood as significant, is incredibly significant. Incredibly
It's an
important.
unwillingness, like a conscious unwillingness.
Yes,
To give a damn.
yes. And I think we see it in the election, the 2020 election story as well. It's not that however many courts have been wrong about the decision. It's that the Trumpists refuse to allow that to be governing. Right. Maybe just one more question and then we'll move on to the signing. And I'll let you know, I had no idea so many people show up. Like, this is great. I have 20 books signed by Marc here. I had him ship books at the day. Never know. And I brought 3 of them in here. So I'm hoping we're gonna sell more than 3. Not because we want money, but we want the story to be told. Yes.
I have a question that is about the word. I grew up in the 70s and you learned about cultural heroes, Black heroes, the idea when we're saying hope or optimism, but you were under this, I guess, illusion growing up in that time period that progress was being made. And a bunch of us were talking about this, parents, but my daughter's here as well, so again, in high school. And we talk about history, and we're journalists, full disclosure. But my question is, when you think about this illusion of progress that you think has happened since the 60s, and then what's happening now, and you talk about technology that is documented, that Martin Luther King used it, or people used it in the time what they had in the day. Here we are using the technology available to us now, but how do you guys deal with the word progress?
Yeah,
There's such a thing, does it exist?
I'm going to answer it and I'm going to let Marc answer it and close us out here. So I'm deeply concerned about the word progress. And, progress, it seems to me, is deeply connected to the Enlightenment and the belief in science, the belief that we can make our lives better, that and I think in many ways this nation was founded on a notion of progress. We didn't articulate it that way quite until the late 19th, early 20th centuries, but the notion of a progressive movement arrived then, right? And the belief was that we could be better tomorrow than we are today, right? And I think one of the most disturbing things about the past few years is that whatever combination of technology and just the story of human history here has ripped off a certain veneer of denial, using that word, refusal, to expose some unprogressive, in fact, retro elements to our human story and an American story. I believe in progress. I believe in the principles of the Enlightenment, and I believe in science, and I believe that we can be better tomorrow than we are today, but only if there's others who believe it with us, which is, of course, the heart of the theory of democracy. So when I look at what's happened in the past few years, I think we're at a very crucial moment. And a lot of people are writing about it. That's one of those tectonic shifts of human history that that the nation state is challenged, that democracy itself is challenged, that the principles of the Enlightenment are challenged. I like to believe, and this is a progressive point of view, that whatever we're moving on to will be informed by what we have learned from this moment. So I am hopeful, but I am hopeful with a measure of concern. And I'll turn to Marc for the last word.
Yeah, I agree. As I sit here with my son, we spent 62 days in the NICU when he came home, or before he came home. And the thing the doctors always said was, don't get, you'll freak yourself out if every day you weigh him, which of course we did. And every day, and every day you check things, right? You have to look at trends. They said if you focus on the day to day, you'll get caught up in that and you'll always be sad. But if you look, from week to week, the trend looks good. Month to month, the trend looks good. Look at the big picture trend. When I think about progress from the 1950s, I try to look at it in those terms, because if I look at it from 2014, if I look from when Mike Brown was killed until now, it's hard to be optimistic. When I look at the structure of the court, so when I look at the latest Roe v. Wade decisions, it'd be hard to have any sense of investment in the possibility that we're going to be okay. We'd be like, how can we be okay in the age of Trump, right? And in the age of pandemic, in the age of war, and et cetera, and environmental abuse. But when I look at the broader sweep of history, the language of progress, I think, becomes useful to me. Because as bad as schools were in the 1950s, or bad as they are now, they're better than they ever were in the 1950s. As awful as race relations are over the last 6 years, as studies show, they're better than they ever were in the 1960s. There's reason to have an investment in the narrative of progress. It's a protracted battle and a protracted struggle. The problem is that all political sides use opportunistically the discourse of progress. And so sometimes the discourse of progress is used as a means of preventing us from actually struggling, right? Like, look how great things are. What are you talking about? You want to reform police, or you want to, God forbid, you want to defund them, right? What are you talking about? Look how great schools are now compared. You didn't even have books 40 years ago. What are you talking about? So the discourse of progress can be weaponized in ways that actually undermine a struggle for thicker forms of democracy and more interesting forms of social arrangement. So I'm hopeful about the world, and I believe in progress. And I believe we've made extraordinary progress, but I don't lean on that too much. Instead, I think about what King said the day before he was killed. He said, only when it is darkest can you see the stars. This is a dark moment. But what our book tries to spotlight is that at all of those dark moments, we've been able to do extraordinary things. Douglas is doing extraordinary things in the midst of Jim and Jane Crow, right? And before, actually in the midst of slavery even. Ida B. Wells is doing extraordinary things in the midst of Jim and Jane Crow. We're watching these things happen. I mean, in the midst of George Floyd's brutal, gruesome, savage killing, thousands of people, no, millions of people took to the streets. Laws have been changed. No-knock warrants in Kentucky. Civilian review boards, tough to get, but we've gotten them in places. Reallocating resources from punitive measures to restorative measures, giving people treatment and rehab instead of jails and cages. We're able to, this is all a sign of the progress. So no matter how dark this moment is, what our book tries to show is that when we do the work, and technology and media is part of the work, when we do the work, we can be victorious. We will be victorious if we look over the grand sweep of history.
You know, you probably see me pick up this book and put it down over and over again. But I'm looking at a page here that is the inscription at the front of the book, and it speaks to the optimism. I'm sorry, to the hope that Mark is there, and the hope that comes, and it comes in part because of the range and possibilities put forward by technology in our own time. But it comes from James Baldwin, and Baldwin wrote, "Love forces at last this humility. You cannot love if you cannot be loved. You cannot see if you cannot be seen." And that is, as you can tell, the inspiration for the title of the book, even though I found that quote long after we had that title.
We were initially black and white.
That's right. The title of the book is black and white, and it's amazing what happens in the course of writing a book, that organically things change, right? And you end up with, it's a process. We hope the process that has been initiated by the democratization of technology and video and the ability for all of us to see more than we saw a decade ago, more than we saw 5 years ago, will lead to lead us away from injustice and towards justice. Thank you all for coming out tonight.